Welcome back to the Six Ranch Podcast. On today's episode, I have my good friend Bam Bam, aka Bryan Marshall, out of Boise, Idaho. Bam was in the Marine Corps, and he's hunted professionally, and he works in the outdoor industry now. Super good guy, give you the shirt off of his back. He started an incredibly powerful nonprofit to help wounded veterans get back into the woods and on the waters, back into school, keep them in houses. This guy's done some amazing stuff, and he's a complete wild man. But he knows exactly what he's talking about when it comes to clothing that you need to survive. And even beyond surviving, he doesn't mind being comfortable while he's doing it. So, without further ado, Bam Bam. Bam, what is the difference between civilian clothing and military clothing?
Oh God, that's a loaded question, buddy. Off the top of my head, I would say civilian clothing probably has a lot more love and care put into it than military clothing. Off the top of my head, it's not a mass-produced, just a numbers thing. People actually probably put a little R&D into civilian clothes and like how it feels or it wears, rather than just putting out a piece of product for the numbers.
Yeah. If you can find, I will say this, if you can find a piece of gear that is used by both civilians and the military, then that thing's going to pass muster everywhere.
Oh, 100%. I mean, there are some, but I mean, you take back up on that. That's made, that works for civilian and military. It's usually created by civilians that the military adopts and picks up. So then you go that route. It's just then you get the comforts. You're like, man, there's actually this makes sense instead of just wearing a Nomax suit that's made for a midget that they put in a guy that's 6'3", 280 pounds, and it can't even move in it. So yeah, I get it.
Did you guys have the blast panties? Do you remember those things, the ballistic underwear?
We didn't, thank God. They talked about us having to wear those, and I was like, I'll take a shot to the nuts before I wear some blast panties and the shoulder pads and all that stuff the Army was wearing. I remember we were right outside of Ramadi, and it was called Camp Tombstone, and we had this Army convoy rolling through, and they stopped into the fuel up real quick. And we're all standing out there. These guys get out. I'm talking like full shoulder pads and legs and armor and all this stuff. And we're looking at these guys like, what the hell is that? Like, never seen any of this gear in my life. Like, they've never even offered any of this protection to us. And the Army guy looks at it. He's like, hey, man. And I'm like, what's up? He's like, where do you all piss around here? And I was like, in those tubes. And he's like, what do you mean? I go, you piss in the tubes that are in the ground. He's like, no, seriously. And I was like, wait, where do you guys piss? Like, I thought it was normal. Like, did you piss in a tube in the ground? They're like, we piss in toilets and in urinals. And I was like, get out of here, bro. Don't even bother me with this. And this guy was so short, he couldn't piss in the tube. So he was walking around the fob trying to find rocks and stuff. And he finally got a couple rocks and a couple ammo cans and had to stack them. And he was still on his tippy toes trying to pee in this tube in the ground. But I'm sure 90% of people have no idea what I'm talking about. But yeah, it was good times.
Yeah, definitely. Dude, some of the stuff that we had to wear, and then like some of the restrictions, like you could only wear, your watch cap or your beanie if it was dark outside. Like, what if it's cold during the day? Like, this is crazy.
I'll never forget, we're on the rifle range, and especially you being an officer, you guys can't plan for. So it was one of those things where we're there at like 3:34 in the morning, no idea why. It doesn't even get light out till 7, 8 o'clock. And I'm standing there, and obviously I was stationed on Pendleton, so you have that morning dew, like that mist that comes in. And it is freezing, man. It's the middle of winter, but I mean, it's just cold. You're standing there in just your camis. And I got my hands in my pocket, and I got a fleece on. I swear to God, this dude like rappelled out of the sky. I don't even know where he came from. And this dude just like knife hands me and lifes me out like, hey, you cold? And I'm like, yes, I'm freezing. Like, are you not? Like, that was my response to him. And he was like, to choose my ass. And I was like, God, like, you asked me a question, I answered it. You can't get mad at me for that. Like, yeah, I'm cold. Like, I don't care. I'm human. At the end of the day, I am cold, and I'm standing here. Like, let me put my hands in my pockets. But yeah, I remember being in Al Assad and over in Iraq, And it was cold, man. We'd get back from operating like 2 or 3 weeks. We'd come back to resupply. I mean, we're covered in just crap, just nasty and freaking diesel and you name it, every fluid's on you. And we would go to the run to the chow hall real quick because that Army chow hall had these hua bars, these Army like apple cinnamon hua bars. I don't know if you had those when you were there. And we would run over there with a grenade box and we'd fill this grenade box full of brown sugar Pop Tarts and those hua bars as like a snack because all we were eating was MREs and it was so good. And I'll never forget these sergeant majors would stand outside of the chow hall just like knife handing people as they came out. And here we come, like no shaves, like no rank on, with beanies on in the middle of the day. Oh my God, I got lifed out on that one. I'm talking, it felt like I was back at boot camp, but I just took that one on the chin. You have to at that point.
Yeah, it's just crazy. You know, one of the cold water obstacles that I had to do, we had to crawl through these ditches that had barbed wire over the top of them and like a bunch of dumb stuff. And you had to pop out occasionally and try and get your gun to work, which it wouldn't because it's firing blanks and it's all muddy and frozen now. But they'd literally gone out and chopped all of the ice out of these things with splitting mauls and sledgehammers because they were completely frozen and we couldn't do the obstacle if it was just ice. So it was really cold and we had to stand there and, you're just in your blouse and your trousers, absolutely freezing to death. And we stood there for like 45 minutes before it was our turn to go through this obstacle. And there was a kid in my group who had been an NCAA national champion cross country runner. And he was a rabbit. He was running a 3 mile in like 14 minutes flat, but he had 0% body fat. And he legitimately had a heart attack after he went through that because he got so cold. And it's like, this is the wrong clothing for us to be wearing. Like there's stuff out there that we could do this in.
I remember sitting on a post in the middle of the night in Iraq, right? And I mean, it's 1, 2 in the morning, and it was, imagine like a 70-foot tall ant hill. It was like this random hill that just went straight up. It looked just like a big old termite or ant mound, right? And we built a Overwatch, a post on the top of this thing. We would sit up there in the middle of the night, and dude, your water bottles would be frozen solid after like a 2-hour shift up there. We were so cold at one point, dude. We were so cold. My buddy and I got in the same sleeping bag. We put a poncho over us, and what we would do is we'd mix diesel in sand to make the right consistency, and we'd light it on fire, put the poncho over us just to create some warmth. It was, dude, we would have just got our throat slit and been perfectly fine with it on that post. It was that miserable. And we would come out of that post, I mean, dude, and there was like soot pouring out of your nose. Like you were coughing up black chunks from breathing just diesel fuel. It was so miserable. And it's just like, those are those moments in your life, and it's like, I should have gone to college, or I should just, like, one of those moments. But trust me, man, if you join the military, you have those come to Jesus moments with like that. I wish we had just had just a nice piece of, nice jacket would have been great for us.
Yeah. Well, and then you compare that with now where, you and I are both hunting professionally, working in the outdoor industry. Both of us are guiding. And there are a million options for clothing to keep you, comfortable or effective or whatever your goal is for a lot of weather conditions. And if somebody, say they're changing brands or they're just getting into it and, they're used to shopping at, REI or Trader Joe's or wherever the heck they get their stuff from, like it can be overwhelming. But the reality is, the kit that you need to be effective in 98% of the hunting conditions that you'll ever see is fairly basic. So I just want to take some time and go over that with you today. And like, let's start with, hot weather hunting, archery season, early season. What kind of gear are you actually wearing?
Oh man, that's a really good question. Like, I mean, obviously it really varies, but in like you said, man, I get questions all the time on my social media, and like I'm no professional, I'm no like I'm avid hunter outdoorsman, but there's obviously some guys out there that know every piece of gear and the just they can name every little thing, and it almost gets overwhelming because I'll listen to some of these podcasts and these guys will be listing off gear, and I'm like, what the hell are they even? What is that? Like, and me and myself, like, I live in the mountains, and I'm just like, I had no idea. I've never even considered stuff, and it almost gets kind of overwhelming. But like for me, I try to keep it as basic as possible, man. Like for early season, I'll run like for elk. I always have like a base layer with me, like a merino wool layer. I'm a huge merino wool guy. You know, it's one of those things I don't think people appreciate it until you actually need it, or if you had to use it or borrow it when you're on a hunt. And you know, even though it might be hot, I'll go with like a thin merino wool layer. One, because I'm a sweater, I'm a stinky dude when I'm on the mountain. And for some reason, it's just for me, I can wear those for several days at a time and not have to worry about the funk. But that's what I usually start with. Then I really like a lightweight, like a polyester shirt, and that's when the heat when it heats up, starts getting those midday temperatures. I like to be able to switch into that because it's extremely breathable for me, and it's really light. Like it packs, it's really packable. Doesn't take up much space. I mean, the weight on it is nothing. So you know that's kind of like my go-to, especially if you're like I said, I know you're a big guy, and so you're just putting on miles. Dude, I sweat all day. And so with like a polyester shirt, I can try to stay away from cotton as much as possible. I absolutely do not wear cotton. And with the polyester, if I do work up sweat, get drenched, I can hang it in a tree with just a little bit of a breeze and those things dry out so fast. I mean, it's one of those things you stop and take a lunch break or tuck up underneath a tree and just sitting there on you and you're not moving. I mean, dude, it'll dry out no problem. Like those are my tops, what I prefer for the warm weather, warmer days. Especially I like a real lightweight, almost like a fishing style shirt, but in camo that has a hood on it. That way, if you're, for the days that you're glassing, like especially for antelope hunts, or you're trying to find that buck in high country and you're sitting on a rock, know where you're going to be in shade. It's always good to have, the type of shirt that'll have a hood on it, or at least get you out of the sun a little bit. Is kind of what I really turn toward in that type of season.
And a little bit of sun protection is really important, not just from a comfort standpoint, but from a health standpoint. Like skin cancer is a real deal. And I heard a lady say the other day, just talking to a tourist that had just showed up and gotten torched out on the beach of the lake or whatever. And they're like, well, you get sunburnt more here because you're closer to the sun because it's higher elevation. Like that's such bogus. So I'm going to squash that one right now in case somebody else actually believes this. If you're at higher elevation, there's less atmosphere to filter out ultraviolet rays, which cause radiation and sunburn. All right. So it's not because you're 2,000 feet closer to the sun that's a cajillion miles away. It is because there's a little bit less atmosphere to filter out that UV. And if you're on a high altitude buck hunt or whatever, like you've got to protect yourself. Otherwise, you can really get hurt.
No, and that's I mean that's funny. I mean I've always heard that. And it's like, man, you mean to tell me 1,500 feet in elevation, I'm that much closer to the sun? Like, come on. But no, especially like I really like the shirts that have a UPF block in them because for that exact reason. And the last thing you want to do is be on a 3 or 4 day hunt in high country or more, and you get fried sitting, like your back's just burned sitting in the sun all day. Then now you got to deal with it. It's just one of those extra things that just you want to be as comfortable as possible. Some guys, I know like yourself, like the push to those max. You want to know your limits, which great. But me, I like to come in and be comfortable as possible on those types of hunts.
So if you are out there for a couple days and you're wearing synthetics and they get all funky and smelly because there's a bunch of bacteria building up in them, what are your options? I mean, can you wash stuff in the backcountry? Is that even possible?
I I honestly do. Like I won't bring like soap or anything like that in unless obviously I try to cut down on as much weight as possible. But I've honestly like I'm one of those guys whenever I'm stopped or I know I'm gonna have some downtime, I am shoes off, socks off, shirt off. Like I'm trying to absorb some sun when I can, kind of dry out my body as much as I can. But I'll take those polyester shirts. I really don't do it with my merinos as much, but you can. They just take longer to dry. I mean, if I have a lot of downtime and I know I could wring them out and get them in the sun all day, if I'm not going to need them, I'll do it. But those polyester shirts, I'll dunk those in that sand and rub them in rocks, and I'll just rub, like old school, bend over a creek and scrub them with your hand kind of deal, just to get the funk out of them and get them fresh again. And man, I'll throw in a bush, or even if it's hot, I'll put it right back on with that nice cool water on it. And I mean, I'll off and going again, and I do that constantly every year wherever I'm at. Obviously, if you don't have a stream or anything, you're just kind of more hunting real high elevation. You're just looking for seeps in the ground, like you don't have that option. But, I've definitely washed a lot of my clothes. I've washed a lot of socks in creeks and stick them on trekking poles and let them dry during the day. I've done it all.
One of the sources for information that I really like for backcountry hunting is not a hunting book or source of information at all. It comes from the books that are written about people who are traveling on these long cross country trails, like the Appalachian Trail,
Yep.
the Pacific Crest Trail, the Continental Divide Trail. And like, if you want to learn how to get weight out of your pack and how to get the most out of your gear, look at the people who are spending, 6 months walking 3,000 miles. Like, they learn.
Exactly.
And one of the things that those guys do is they take a big clothespin and they put it on the back of their pack. And every time they cross a creek, they change socks. So they'll bring 2 pairs of socks. They come to the creek, they take their socks off, wash them, put them on the clothespin so they can dry, put the fresh, dry pair on, and they can walk all the way across the freaking country doing that. It's really amazing. So that's something that I do now is I keep a big clothespin on my pack, and I can wash my clothes and then have, a mobile drying rack, which is my backpack as I go. And it's really not that hard to do.
No, man, and it's funny you say that. I used to actually work on a project when I was in the utility world, and we were on the Pacific Crest Trail in the Angeles Crest Forest, and we'd have hikers all day coming through our job sites, or we'd run into they. I mean, they would be sleeping on our roads in the middle of the night. We almost ran a bunch of them over one time, but man, we'd pull up to these hikers, and I mean, I'll tell you what, like I'd be like, "Hey, do you guys need anything? Do you have any trash?" And I mean, they'd be like, "Oh yeah, I have trash," and you just see this look on their face like, "Oh man, I'm gonna get rid of so much weight right now." And the guy would pull like a granola wrapper out of his pocket and hand it to me because he didn't want that much, like he didn't want to deal with it. I'd be like, "You guys, like, you need water, you need to chug some real quick." But I mean, those they have it down. I mean, from the walk from Canada to Mexico, I mean, it you got to be smart about it. But yeah, I mean, you got a great point there. We would see these guys and they would just get rid of anything they could at any point. I mean, if it came down to a granola wrapper, they were literally like a gum wrapper, like, "Please, can you guys take this trash off of me?" And we're like, "Yeah, cool, like keep going." So yeah, those would definitely be the ones that I would listen to.
Okay, so once the weather cools down a little bit, how is your system going to change?
So, which one thing I like to carry that kind of goes from that cooler mornings, maybe it warms up in the day and cools down in the evenings, or do you just have those cold fronts that roll through? I like to bring like a nice grid fleece hoodie. You know, I'm a hoodie guy. Some guys aren't, but me personally, if I have the option of buying anything that has a hood option on it, I go with it every time. I hate a cold neck. I hate cold ears and a head. If I could just have that comfort, but that's one of those things that I'll try to transition to when it's not quite cold, but it's not the warm days, and you're just, but you're going to work up that body temperature of hiking and doing that. I like to go with a nice, not a big, just heavy duty hoodie, like more of a grid fleece, thinner hoodie. That way you can layer it. You put that on with a merino wool underneath, and I mean, I'm usually good to go for the majority of most of the days out there. Is what I really like to fall back on.
Yeah, I'm the same way. So as soon as I go from a merino base layer, I'm going straight to a grid fleece. It's kind of my next step up. And, if I'm early archery season, I like pants that are really, really lightweight. And sure, they're going to tear a little bit more easily, but they're lightweight. So there's a give and take with everything. But I want to be able to feel the wind hitting my body. And something that you and I have talked about before is the story you always hear from elk hunters or deer hunters or whatever is like, all of a sudden I felt the wind on the back of my neck and it was over. It's like, if that's the only exposed piece of skin you have, then you're really missing out on using your skin as a sensory organ. Your skin is the largest organ in your body. So if you can feel the wind hitting your whole body through like a, jersey style polyester shirt or some really thin pants that let wind get in and help evaporate that sweat off of you, then maybe you felt that wind 30 seconds earlier and can make the move to get away and move around that animal so that, maybe now you've got a chance. Just something to think about.
I'm a big believer in that. I mean, I mean, I'm sure every single hunter that's had any time in the mountains has a story about, being 30. I mean, last year I was 30 yards from probably the biggest bull I've ever been on in my life, and I had a full jacket and pants on, and the whole wind on the back of the ear. But if I would have had a lighter system on and been able to shift that, I mean, who knows? I could have dropped back off the side of this face that I came up and maybe have been able to close from underneath instead of being, in the path of the wind. And so it really screwed me. But I love, like you said, I like a lightweight pant that's extremely just kind of stretchy and breathable. That way, like if you do stop, you're not just. I mean, there's times where I'll have a thicker pair of pants on for warmer days, and like my legs are just drenched, like soaked from top to bottom from just sweating. So like I've really tried to switch over and find that happy medium of a lightweight pant. But like you said, they do. I've torn them. It's one of those things you sacrifice. Like, okay, am I going to be hot, sweaty for a little bit more of a durable pant, or I want to be really comfortable, be able to read the weather, the wind, and be able to dry things quicker. And so it's a happy medium with when it comes to pants on that for sure. You just got to find that
Yeah.
that point that you like.
And are you moving or are you sitting? If you're moving, if you're actively hiking, you can get away with, wearing a t-shirt and still be perfectly warm. There's a lot of days when it's 15 degrees outside in the wintertime and I'm splitting firewood in a t-shirt and I'm still sweating
Yep.
because my body's generating a bunch of energy. So, I mean, once you move on from that, like let's say it gets one click colder and that grid fleece isn't cutting it anymore, what's the next layer you're putting on?
Well, honestly, for me, preference wise, I love like a puffy jacket, a down jacket. It's one of those things that it's probably in my top three to top four pieces of gear that I always have on me. I mean, this was my come to Jesus moment. I was trying to finish my Grand Slam for Turkey. I was hunting in California, right? And it's like, looked at the weather report, 75 degrees all week. We were going to be on this ranch. It was literally like this historical old cowboy ranch where there were shootouts in this house. Like it was the coolest place I've ever hunted. But I look at the weather report, it's supposed to be 75 every day, nice. We rolled out and we were like, we're miles from this camp. I mean, it was a huge ranch. All of a sudden, like I'm in a t-shirt and pants and this storm rolls in. I mean, it's the snowflakes the size of my hand. I mean, and I am just drenched, freezing cold. I gave Britt was with me. I gave her my actual jacket and that I had, but I mean, dude, I was damn near hypothermic by the time we got back to the camp, and I was like, I will never make that mistake again. And the first thing I went out and did is I bought a down jacket, and so that's been my go-to ever since. And what I'll do with that down jacket is I literally will roll my jacket into the hood of itself, and I stuff it in the bottom of my pack, and it stays there ever since. And I've had those moments where it was sunny when I left the house. We got up on the mountain, all of a sudden it's just a black wall coming, and that temperature drops, and I'll pull that my puffy out, and I'm good. Like I've never had any issues. So like that's kind of like when I start to transition to cooler weather, but I'll still have it with me 99% of the time. But just for those nights or those days where you get caught on the mountain or it's going to be cold, I love a down jacket, like a puffy jacket. They don't weigh much, they compress pretty tight. That's a big go-to for me.
Yeah, and they make an awesome pillow for when you're sleeping out, if you are spending a night out. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't ever really bring that up because people always look at me weird, but I use mine I literally, even if it's September and I'm elk hunting backcountry and it's 90 degrees out, like that'll be in my pack, but that's my pillow every single night. Like legitimately, anybody I've hunted with, they can vouch for it. I pull my puffy jacket out and I'll sleep on it every night.
So that's kind of an interesting piece of kit, and it's outside of this conversation, but I'm going to bring it up anyways. I used to get all these like camp inflatable pillows that they'd break down to like half the size of a beer can, and inevitably they'd pop, and then just leave you in a state of permanently pissed off. So I found one this year that is just a fleece pocket with a zipper, so you cram your clothes into it, and then you've got this nice soft fleece, and it can't pop because you're just filling it with the extra stuff that you brought, and that is like
Really?
the yeah, that's been a big game changer pillow department thing for me this year. So I'm pretty jacked up about it. And I'm with you all the way on the down hoodie. Synthetics definitely have their place. If you think that you're going to get sporadic rain or something like that, and you don't want to bring a rain jacket or a shell, synthetics can help you out a little bit. But I love how much down compresses and how much it lofts. And I usually go for one that has a little bit heavier weight in the actual nylon that holds it down in.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these
Yep.
companies that are like obsessed with lightweight, that shell that holds it down gets brittle and it gets holes in it, and you just leak feathers everywhere you go, and you end up basically getting covered in duct tape. It's like, this is stupid. I wish it would have weighed an extra 4 ounces to start with, so I didn't have to deal with this.
Oh yeah, and then if you got a beard or in your truck, I mean those feathers for the next year that you're wearing that thing are just. I got ran through a tree a couple of years ago on we were doing a backcountry hunt on horses, and this horse hated me. And every damn pine tree would walk by, I mean, I'd have its head pulled in the complete opposite direction, and it would go straight in the pine trees, like trying to pull me off of it. And it shredded my puffy jacket. I mean, I still wear it because I love it, but yeah, I mean, every time I'd sit down or move, it just poof feathers all on my face or up my nose. But I get it. But yeah, it's definitely one of those pieces of gear I can't live without.
Yeah. I had one from Kuyu. It was a fine jacket. It was like a Super Down Pro or whatever. Very, it was expensive as hell. But I called it my wind indicator jacket because all I had to do was like ruffle my shoulders a little bit and feathers would leak everywhere, and I'd know which way the wind was going. But that's kind of an expensive way to go about which way the wind's blowing.
Well, thank God now there's companies that make patches for puffy jackets. So there we I've found some patches that match camo patterns and things like that that you can slap over those holes now, which is good.
Oh, that's nice. All right. So, you know, now we're probably in that, below 20 degrees and adding wind and precip if we need to go beyond merino, grid fleece, puffy jacket. So your outside layer, what are you doing for that, for that wind and weather barrier?
I mean, so there's I run a I'm kind of I guess I don't know. Maybe a lot of people that do it. So I'll either have like a heavy duty insulated jacket. I'm talking, especially from late winter. If you're worried about wind, rain, sleet, any of that, or if you're just sitting down and you're going to be on the ground for a little bit and don't want to worry about getting wet, I'll run like a really heavy duty jacket if I know I'm not going to be doing a lot of hiking and a lot of moving. But I'll be honest with you, man. What I've found myself doing is finding like a real lightweight rain pant and jacket. Just like if we're going to stop and have to glass or sit, I'll run a thicker pant, not like a real heavy, late winter gear. But this is for when I'm being mobile. I'll run like a medium weight pant, but then I'll bring a rain set with me, my lightweight rain gear. So if we stop, we're doing glass, and I'll actually put that on and act as a windbreaker plus waterproof. And so that way I'm sitting on the ground. I don't have to worry about that snow melting, getting the back of your legs and butt all wet. Or if you're just kneeling down or resting, taking a knee, and you're sitting your elbow on the ground, I'll put a top on. And so that's kind of if I want to stay light. But I know if like we're going to be going to a peak and we're going to be glassing or sitting there all day or stand hunting, I go with like one of a really heavy duty insulated jacket that's waterproof and windproof. And if I'm going to be doing late season a lot of just spot and stock, that's when I'll go with a little bit of a lighter option with the rain gear if I need to stop or anything like that. And that's just me. I kind of try to keep it different like that. In lighter in different ways. So I mean, obviously everybody's got their own opinion on how they would want to do it, but there's just so many varieties out there. But I think for like cost efficient and just being cheap, I don't need to get the real heavy duty pants. Unless I'm going to be doing a lot of like whitetail hunting and sitting in stands when it's just miserable out. So that's kind of my option with that.
Yeah, I'm a lot the same way. If I'm gonna be packing rain gear, just like in case, then I definitely want the lightest stuff I can get, and I'm probably not gonna be moving around in it very much if I'm wearing that. But I do tend to go for the little bit heavier fabric. I do stay away from Gore-Tex because every piece of Gore-Tex I've ever owned has failed me basically as soon as that DWR finish comes off. And if you're wearing it very much, man, you just get wet in them, and they're crazy expensive. And it's such a bummer that you have this honeymoon phase where it's like, oh, look at the water beat up and fall off, and then the next season or the next month, if you keep wearing it, all of a sudden you're just drenched in your elbows and your shoulders and down your back, and it's like, I just wasted 400 freaking dollars. This is crazy. So I like
Yeah,
some of the more advanced stuff, like the shoulder fabric. Have you been around that stuff? Shoulder?
shoulders are great, dude. Shoulders great. So it's one of those things. Like I'm just getting into that and running that gear this year. To start last fall into this spring, and man, I'm telling you what, that's an absolute game changer. It's one of those things, and how like I've had people ask me because I've we killed a few bears this spring, and I was wearing it, and I had a lot of people reach out, and it's one of those things where it's a type of material, and this is how we explain it, like it's almost like a pine cone. When that fabric gets warm, it allows it to breathe. But then when you cools down and you stop moving and that fabric goes back to its retention and the tightness, and so it actually will hold your body heat when you need it to. And then as far as like the rain gear, mind blowing. I mean, I've run it for a full season. I mean, I'd like to say that I'm out a lot more than the average guy, and I mean, I've run gear that was the shoulder fabric that was water resistant. And I sat in a torrential downpour rain this spring with Britt when she killed her bear. I mean, this is supposed to be just water resistant gear, not waterproof. And I sat there for 4.5, almost 5 hours just getting dumped on. And I mean, literally the only spots that I had were under my armpits where it leaked a little bit. But I mean, for a water resistant pant and top, I couldn't beat it. I mean, I was blown away by the performance of that gear. And so, I mean, I was instantly sold on it. And that wasn't even the rain gear. That was just the average in between line. And, it just marketed as water resistant. I was like, all right, I want to put this to the test and see how it actually works. And I mean, I was blown away by it.
And that's one of those situations where if you were getting wet inside your gear, you're not going to sit there for that long. You're going to be like, all right, we'll come back another day. This isn't happening. But because you sat there and were able to comfortably, then your wife ended up killing an awesome bear.
No, and that was it. And like I knew it was going to be one of those miserable nights. I knew we were going to get wet, and I told her, I was like, and I actually was like, here's my actual rain jacket, and which I've ordered one now because I've wanted to make sure she had the proper gear. But yeah, I wanted to prove it. I'm sitting here and I'm going to be wearing it, and I'm going to have people asking me questions on what I think of it. I was like, I want to run my gear to the absolute max. I mean, to be able to just sit literally, we're sitting on a bait, but on this hillside, we're pretty open. I mean, and I was just down, I'm talking just downpoured, man. I was like a hurricane up there on the mountain, and it was miserable. And I just looked at it. I was like, God, please, this can just stop any minute. And as soon as it eventually stopped raining and that bear stepped out and she hammered it. But yeah, I was really impressed by that gear.
So there's an easy way to test your gear if you're wondering about it. And the time to find out is not when you're, 8 miles back and you can't even make it to the truck that day. So if you think that your gear may or may not be waterproof, throw that stuff on and go stand in your shower and put it on blast on cold and stand there. And if you can make it 15 minutes and you're still dry, you've got a good piece of gear. If you're wet, you don't. So now you know in the comfort of your own home whether your stuff is going to work or not. And if you can't tolerate that, then you probably need to think about either completely staying out of the woods, if that's even a possibility, or getting some better gear if you feel like you might get caught out in that and you want to be able to stay effective while you're in that condition.
Exactly. And I've run into guys, and like I've had, especially being a guide, I've had clients show up on hunts that I mean, I was mind blown by the gear they showed up with. And it was nothing on them. They just weren't educated, or they thought, that it was their proper gear. Like I had a guy reach out to me earlier this year, not earlier, let's say it's probably about 2 months ago. And he's going on a moose hunt this year, and he had some questions on gear, and I told him to send me what he had. And I mean, I was like, thank God you reached out, man. You're going to be the most it was a 14-day float trip moose hunt. And I was like, listen, man, like you couldn't pay me to wear that gear to Alaska on a 14-day hunt. He was like, well, why? And he was so set in his mind because it was waterproof, but it was like a fleece, heavy duty fleece top and bottom. And that was it. And I was like, man, like once that gets wet, which it will, even though it's a waterproof jacket, 14 days in Alaska. I mean, I don't care what waterproof gear you're in, unless you're in like a fishing suit, those rubber offshore fishing suits, you're eventually going to wear, it's eventually going to, seep a little bit. And once that, and he just wasn't prepared for it. And I was like, man, you should honestly, and I told him the same thing. I'm like, if you don't want to stand in your shower, just put it on a rack and put a sprinkler system on it and just hose that thing down for 30, 40 minutes and see, or longer. And so he ended up messaging me back. He's like, man, you're completely right. Like it ended up seeping through. I was like, yeah, try drying that in Alaska, doing a float trip. And so it's nice to test your gear out. I mean, if he never would have reached out to me, I'm sure he would have had the most miserable hunt of his life.
Yeah. And probably would have been paying a bunch of extra money to get a float plane in there and get him out early and ruin his hunt.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. All that money would have been flushed. Hopefully it wouldn't have been flushed. I'd like to see, everybody be successful. But I mean, I hear so many stories like that. These guys just show up and they have no idea. They're not prepared. They don't test their gear out. And they end up getting caught with their pants down on the mountain. And it's like they end up having to leave early of this once in a lifetime hunt, or they just were miserable the whole time, or they got to come back to town and get proper gear. And yeah, I'm a big, firm believer on whatever you get. If you know it's going to fit you, test it out. Run it through the ringer, put it on in the conditions, or if you don't have and you can't wait, like you said, get in the shower or hose that thing down and see how it works out.
What about gloves and hats?
So I actually get this question quite a bit, which is so random because I've never asked anybody, but I'm a mitten guy. So I get really my fingers and my toes. I for some reason are always just cold, but I love a good mitten, and so I prefer. I know, don't make me. I don't know what it is. I know what it is from being a kid in upstate New York and ice fishing and snowmobiling in the frozen tundra up there. We always had these big. We got them at the Army surplus store when we were kids. It had like a beaver top on them, and they were green. And there were these big, heavy duty mittens, and like I grew up with mittens. It's all we ran, like on snowmobiling and ice fishing and all that, and running traps and all that. So it was one of those things. So now I prefer a mitten, but I really like the mittens that you can fold back so you can still use your fingers and have, the feel and everything. But I mean, that's a hunter's preference for me. I'll have some guys reach out and they're like, "What do you run for a glove?" And I tell them, and they're like, "I would never wear a mitten." And I'm like, "Oh God, okay." Like, I didn't know that was. I guess it's like a new.
No, we got a tough guy. We got a tough guy here.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't have fingertips, buddy. But yeah, it's like admitting you drink White Claws in a hunting camp. So they just look down at you, I guess, if you got mittens on. But no, I'm a big mitten guy. And I love a good fleece beanie. I travel everywhere with a beanie. That's why I buy hoods on everything because I hate cold ears and head. But yeah, I always have a set of gloves, lightweight gloves for obviously your September time frame, maybe beginning of October. But when it starts cooling off, I definitely switch to a mitten style glove. Don't judge me, James.
Yeah. No, dude, I wear them too. And I like the ones that have like a tether to go to my wrist so that when I shuck that thing off to be able to grab my gun, that my mitten's not going to fall down the hill. So yeah, I look like the kid in the Christmas Story. But what I really like is fingerless wool gloves and then being able to put big fleece mittens over the top, and then I can withstand, you know, any temperature. And that's what I'm snowmobiling in. That's what I'm riding my snow bike in. When I'm trapping in the wintertime, of course, when I'm actually setting traps, I switch to a wool glove that has rubberized palms so that I'm not putting my scent down as much on the traps. But everything in between, I'm with you on the mittens, but I definitely feel a little bit ridiculous, especially with like the tethers going to my wrist. I feel like a freaking dork, but it is functional, and form follows function.
Yeah, but I mean, little things like a tether, like you don't understand how important that is until you take it off and it just goes sliding down a ravine, and you're just looking at your buddy like, son of a gun, you got to go down and get it. You're like, yeah, you're like, these have tethers on them? Oh, 100% buying these. And then, so people will look at you like, why do you have those things tethered to you or dummy corded, as, the Marine Corps saying? It's like, well, until you've lost a pair, they fall off besides a creek and one goes floating down, then you're running down to try to get ahead of it and scoop it out of a creek. Then you go with the tether part. So I get it, man, completely. I'm just glad somebody's got my back on the mitten thing.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll totally back you up on the White Claws, but mittens for sure. And when I wad up my snow bike or snowmobile and yard sale stuff everywhere, I don't want to dig around in the snow and try and find my mitten. I want it to be still attached to me when the dust settles. And hats, man, like I can make it through the whole year wearing either a trucker's cap or a fleece beanie. So I'm with you there. I think that those will get me through all the conditions that I'm ever out in. I don't think I've ever worn a rain hat.
No.
No, I'd pull my hood up. That's what a hood is for. So,
Mm-hmm.
well, so I think with the stuff we've talked about, so if you've got a lightweight pant, a little bit heavier pant, a poly shirt, a merino shirt, a grid fleece, a puffy, and then a weather barrier jacket on top of that. You've got a ball cap, you've got a beanie, you've got fingerless gloves that you can operate with, or glove mitten combinations that you can expose your fingers, and then a bigger mitten type glove to go over the top of it. Like that can take you everywhere from 100 degrees to 20 below zero. and you can hunt in it.
And that's honestly it, and that's all you really need. I mean, obviously, especially for the guys that are just getting into it, or I see these young kids, and they'll post these pictures and just boxes of all this gear, and I'm like, God, I would never use that. I never maybe recommend that, or I'd recommend this instead. You just need a basic kit to get you that's going to cover from A to Z and everything in between, and you're good to go. And I mean, one thing I think we left out that is a valuable piece of gear is gaiters.
Oh yeah, for sure. And two different types of gators. Like, if I'm hunting in shorts, or say I'm out in my trail running shoes early season because I want to be a little bit quieter, I like the shorty gators that just barely go over your ankle. And the rest of the year, man, I pretty much wear gators no matter the conditions, that go all the way up to my knees.
Yeah, I'm a big guy, like a big gator guy. It's one of those deals that I'll wear them if it's raining. If I mean, like you and I did that elk hunt in August a couple years ago. I mean, if it wasn't for gators, I mean, all that wheat or whatever the hell we were walking through, I mean, there was just billions of little seeds coming off of that. And I mean, just busting brush, or, those dewy mornings when you don't want the bottom of your pant wet, your boots are wet. Like it's just a great piece of tool that I think is definitely overlooked for guys that don't normally run them or have never just tried it. So it was one of those things I got turned on to because I mean, I was miserable on a hunt, and we were doing a mountain lion hunt one year, and I just didn't. I was not a big gator guy at the point. Thank God my buddy that I was with had an extra set, and it sold me on him after the first day. I mean, it was just a lifesaver for me. So yeah, I'm a big gator fan. That would probably be the last thing on my list. The top, like what we've talked about over, is a good set of gators.
One thing that I'll add that I really look for in pants, whether it's archery season or whether I'm trapping or rifle season or whatever, I want knee pads, man. I shoot so much better if I have to shoot off of a knee and my knee is comfortable and I don't have pine cone or rock jabbing into my kneecap. If I have to get down on my knees and look for elk or shoot off my knees or whatever, dude, knee pads make all the difference in the world. And I just did a 50-mile hike through the largest wilderness area in Oregon, and I wore tactical pants that had 16 pockets in them and knee pads. And obviously not the ideal pant for that kind of thing, but it worked fine. I didn't have any rub spots. It wasn't a big deal. And the times that I had to like get down on my knees and crawl under logs and stuff where that would have normally been a lot more miserable, it helped me. And I want knee pads on pretty much any pant that I hunt with if I can get them.
It's definitely one of those nice things. I mean, and now I remember when knee pads were just coming out, there were these big, bulky foam pads, and now it's like they're almost down to pretty much like a neoprene cutout, like super thin and just enough to get that rock bedded out of your kneecap. So they've definitely come a long way in the last couple of years. And I'm a fan of them. I don't rock it on all my pants, but definitely like earlier season when you're going to be spot and stock antelope, when you're going to be crawling half the day, or even just muleys, like that's knee pads are definitely can be a lifesaver. That's for sure.
I wouldn't mind seeing a shirt that had some elbow pads for those long belly crawls too. Like that, I feel like you'd be a lot more effective if you had some protection on your elbows.
Yep. I did a 3.5 hour crawl on our face last year to kill a muley with a client, and for like a week after that, my elbows were so raw. I mean, they were just scabbed up for a week or two. It was horrible, and that's one of the things I was like, man, if these things. But I mean, you got to be prepared for that. I had like one of our light polyester shirts on, but yeah, it would have been nice to be able to have some elbow pads on that one. I mean, we crawled for just about a half mile, I would say, for about 3.5 hours. It took us. It was just complete flat cut wheat field. But I mean, we got in and we killed it. But yeah, it was one of those moments where I was like, I could have really used an elbow pads on this one.
And for those folks who are not following you yet, you as a guide got clients more giant mule deer bucks than anybody else in the country last year. I was so impressed with the deer that you were able to turn up and stuff like that. Like, who's actually going to crawl 3.5 hours with a client? That's asking a huge amount of anybody, but because you're willing to do stuff like that and you've got gear that can help you and the mindset to do it no matter what, like, you make it happen. And the results were magnificent.
Oh, thanks, man. I appreciate it. And it's like, it's one of those things I have so much pride in, like if I take it so personal if a client doesn't tag out, and it's just one of those things. And I absolutely love finding and killing big muleys. And, I mean, obviously we're not, nobody, if anybody's claiming to be 100% on deer and elk hunts, it's a high fence, so it's definitely one of those things we can't get it done all the time. But I mean, for the guys that I work with in the outfit, I mean, it's definitely top notch, and to be able to have the right gear and equipment, it all helps, But then, it also helps when clients come out prepared. That's another big thing. A lot of guys, I'll reach out to them ahead of time and be like, hey, this is what we're expecting. Like, this is what I want you to have, and here's your gear list. And and that helps out a lot when they show up with proper gear. I mean, I've had guys show up with, we're doing spot and stock mule deer hunts on 210, 220-inch deer, and they're wearing snake boots because they're from Florida. And it's like the loudest thing in the world, and they didn't listen to what we had to say, and it just damn near made things impossible. But we still get it done. But yeah, definitely when it comes to that kind of stuff, having the right gear, and, and just, I just have the passion for it. I absolutely love it, and that helps a lot. Like, not, I don't think a lot of guys are going to drag their client 3.5 hours through a field. And I mean, and on top of it, it was 90 degrees that day. I mean, it was horrible, but we got it done. It was a really good buck.
You bring up an interesting point there, and that's that I think a lot of clients are somewhat afraid to ask their guide what they should bring. And like they want to magically get all the right stuff and just show up looking like they know what they're doing. But I'm much more, I guess, flattered or interested in a client that asks, because I am the expert in the area that I'm guiding in, and that's the reason that's my profession. So just ask me, what should I be bringing? And like, I'm going on a mountain goat hunt this fall, and I've asked the guide like 3 times, hey, is this the kind of kit that I should have? What do you think of this? Is this going to work? Because he's the expert in it. And just because we're like, I'm a guide too, this is my profession, but I haven't hunted that area. I don't know that vegetation. I don't know those weather systems. I don't know the physical exertion, how much we're going to be going and stopping. Like, just ask. Your guide is going to love it if you just ask him.
I would prefer every one of my clients to hit me up and be like, hey man, here's my week. What do you recommend? I would sit every one of them down and be like, here's a gear list. And anybody listening, if you have questions on any spring bear hunts or fall deer, elk, like, I'm not an expert in elk by any means. I know how to get into elk country, but I am horrible at killing them. But it is just one of those things, like, I spend a lot of time in the mountains. So when it comes to gear wise, like, I can line anybody out when it comes to that stuff. And it's and I've talked to guys, and I'll overhear these guys talking. They're like, man, I bought this jacket for $600. And I'm like, I bet you my $100 fleece will do just as much of that if you layer it right. It all comes down to layering and knowing, the conditions and things like that. But back to the guide thing, like, I'm 100%. I love when my clients reach out. They're like, hey, these are my calibers. What should I bring? And it's like, well, one, obviously the most comfortable rifle that you're most the rifle you're most comfortable with, but like, this is what we run into. And especially out in eastern Colorado, I mean, it'll literally be 85, 90 degrees one day, and the next day it's negative 15 degrees, and it's like a sleet storm. So I always carry a little bit of extra gear for my clients just in case that happens and they end up somehow falling and getting wet or something. We don't have to head back to town. But I honestly, when they reach out, I don't ever look at it like, oh god, this guy has no idea. I've had some of the most experienced hunters in the world. They come out and hunt with us, and they'll ask us questions and recommendations, and I'm just like, it honestly is like a sigh of relief. As long as they listen, I'm like, okay, cool. Like, this is what I recommend. It definitely. If anybody listens, you're going to go on hunts, reach out to your outfit, or you can reach out to James or I guess, and we'll point you in the direction as much as possible. But yeah, nobody should be shy about asking questions at all. That's when you end up overpaying for gear or buying things you don't need, and you probably don't have the proper equipment to begin with. So I have no shame in asking, man. I'll go places and be like, hey, like, what's it like? What do I need boot wise? Is it rocky? I just want the layout. I don't know. That's why guys go on hunts, and that's why guys book with guides, because we know the area and we're the professionals in that area. And so, that's what we're there to do, and help you along the way.
Yeah, awesome. Well, man, I really appreciate your time, and I think that we kind of did a pretty okay job of laying out sort of how simple this can be. And if people do want to get a hold of you, where's the best place to do that?
You just shoot me a message on Instagram. It's just BamBam0069. You just send anybody my way, man. I'll help them out. And, guys want to go and have fun and look for cool vetted outfits. I mean, between you and I'm sure we could point guys in the right direction for a lot of things. So,
yep. And I know this to be true, that you will absolutely answer everybody who asks a question, and you take a lot of your personal time doing that. And it means a lot. You set a very good example for the rest of us by doing that, and I appreciate it.
no, I appreciate it, man. And it's like it just comes down to I've looked up to so many people and reached out to them, and they'll blow you off. And I mean, obviously, I try to get to every single person. It's a legitimate question and take my time, because there's been so many times where I was struggling in areas or needed advice, and I reached out to the guys that I looked up to, and they didn't even take the time to answer a question to me. And so I always told myself, man, if I can help anybody in any way, I always would. Like, nobody, I look at everybody, everyone's equal. So if you guys got any questions, just feel free to answer. I'll hit me up with any questions, and I'll help out as much as I can.
All right, brother. Well, I appreciate your time, and I'll catch you later.
Yeah, buddy, be safe, man. We'll see you soon.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the show. This episode was edited by Emily Brannigan, with original music written and performed by Justin Hay. Artwork for the Six Ranch podcast was created by John Chatelain and digitized by Celia Christofferson. If you enjoyed the show, I encourage you to share it with a friend and subscribe. You can find photos and more content on Instagram at Six Ranch Podcast. I'll catch you next week.